Okay, I think there's probably going to be an agenda order change. Basically, well, where's the agenda? Let me bring it up on here. Oh, that basically, I think. I don't know why. I don't. I think Niels does. I don't understand the human rights review team update on any drafts. And there's, I think because he wants to have the guidelines. But we don't have any slides on that one anyway. So it doesn't matter. So we can just go to there and then. Okay, because I have the slides. Yeah. No, yeah, but at the moment, what he wants to do is he wants to do the map one first. We'll see. Okay. Okay, is it 50? It's time to start, right? Okay.
Should I go close the door?
You could. Not too many people here. Okay, it's pretty much time to start. Okay. Hi, this is the human rights. Oh, yes, I have to make it full screen. Yeah. The Human Rights Protocol Considerations Review Research Group. And let me just start with a few intro slides here. I'm Augur Framework. We've got the note well. It's the same note well you've seen often. Go to the agenda. So first was in the beginning, we need a scribe. We have a note taker. Beatrice Martini has volunteered, but we need a jabber scribe. Is there someone willing to be? Thank you, Allison. Okay, now the agenda review, which is what we're on. The first thing will be a brief research group status. Then there's an update from the hackathon. I do not have slides for that. I'm not sure who it is that's going to want to speak on that. But is there a notion of who wants to speak on the hackathon, or is that something we're just skipping? You'll speak on it, Niels? Yeah, in fact, I think you had said if no one else speaks on it, you will, so thank you. Then we have the talk by Roya on, well, actually the title is different, but we'll get to that. Then draft update on anonymity, association, political, and on implementation of 451. Then there's the Human Rights Review Team. Now, it was mentioned to me that the Human Rights and Architecture for IoT Devices should be before the update discussion on the draft guidelines. Was that what you were suggesting, Niels? So we don't have any slides on the guidelines, so we really don't need to change anything. That'll be a discussion. Then there's open discussion if time necessary. And under any other business, if we get it, we had gotten email of Jim Fenton, was it? Yes. And did I remember your name correctly? Yes, good. That's an achievement for me. So wanted to discuss this draft in relation to the HRPC. So hopefully we'll have time for that if we make it through the schedule. So other than the one change that was already made on Neil's request, is the agenda fine? Any need to bash it? Okay, then move on. Oh, you did that. Okay. So folks probably know that Niels has left the role of co-chair, but still remains our most prolific author at the moment. So thank you, Niels. We cooperated in forming this thing together. We argued a lot. You did a lot. You made this happen. So thanks. And Mallory has joined, hopefully everybody saw the note, as in the role of co-chair. So thanks and good luck. Talk to Niels. It could be painful. No. So we have 2 research group drafts in progress, the one on anonymity, the one on guidelines. There are several other drafts out, being worked on. And I noticed that at least in one of them, there's once again the question of, I think it's association, the question of, do we want to make it a research group draft? So we can get to that after Niels talks about it. And I wanted to give an apology for lack of minutes for the last meeting. We did have a note taker who took notes, who sent them to me. I lost them and I never recreated them. And my apology. At some point, I will go back and recreate some notes for that meeting so it doesn't remain a void. But my apologies for that. So any questions on the status of the research group or other comments? Nope, okay. Was that the end of this slide deck? It was. So at this point, Roy, I'd like to invite you, you get to stand in the, you get to stand in the pink box. Here's the clicker and we'll have to adjust things for the, you get,
Okay.
yeah, I don't quite understand the sizing.
Yes,
Oh, there's
I think
better.
It's
No, we're in the
screen.
full screen. It's just not expand. Okay.
I think it's.
Oh, there it is.
kinda
Thank you.
good. Yeah, thank you. Hi, everyone. My name is Roya Ansafi, and I'm a faculty member at the University of Michigan Computer Science and Engineering Department. My research focuses on security and privacy with an emphasis on protecting users from hostile networks. In my lab, we try to develop frameworks to be able to detect network interferences and use these techniques that we have or frameworks that we developed to understand the behavior of those DPIs or intermediaries that does the interference. And then through our understanding and whatever we have discovered, come up with a defense, a sustainable, let's say, circumvention. The type of work that I do at Nature, they're interdisciplinary, and we need to draw tools from computer science and beyond. Obviously, we need to know about network measurement systems and security, but most importantly, I think the impact comes in when we have an understanding of the social and political aspects of the work. With the focus that recently we spent on network management and the prices of the DPIs becoming cheaper and cheaper, we have seen much more censorship happening around the world in the past couple of 10 years or so. And there is no day passed by or there are no months passed by that you don't hear about governments in somewhere freak out and they shut down the internet. Just in this 2-3 couple of days ago, this happened. Or they act very irrationally. For example, like Russia's at April tried to block telegrams and to be able to do so, they had to block the whole Amazon because it was hosted there. So internet censorship is a very overloaded word, so I'm going to just simplify it and say that what I mean by that. Basically, I study internet censorship from the lens of network researcher, which means that the communication between the user and the server is going to be disrupted or interfered in different ways, such as the DNS manipulations or poisoning, the IP blacklisting, port blacklisting like TCP/IP interference, like port 443 being blocked for the destination so that it cannot establish handshake. The TLS can be intercepted, or keywords filtering. All of this stuff is under the umbrella of the stuff I have been trying to focus on detecting them. Before I dive deep, I want to say that it's constantly I constantly question that why do we care about measuring internet censorship? A little bit background about me. I grew up in Iran. I moved to US 8 years ago. And And there were three reasons that I've studied internet censorship. One, because constantly I noticed that our focus is in Iran and China and study the censorship there. And sometimes I found that the reports coming for studying internet censorship are biased, are not well done. So it's only like a VPN in like a capital city of the country running some measurements and claiming censorship for the whole country. That was really not the way I wanted things to be done. Also, I found out that, well, internet censorship is not just a phenomenon that is being observed in suppressive regime. It should be done in a larger scale. It should be studied in a more systematic way. So obviously, you know, advocacy, transparency matter. We want to know where, who, why, and for what reason they're blocking stuff. Also, there is another aspect that why we want to learn about how internet censorship or why internet censorship happened. And that's to be able to come up with a good defense. Almost at around 2015, Great Firewall of China launched a distributed denial of service attacks towards GitHub and Cloudflare. Because they were hosting a website called greatfire.org. And the greatfire.org was a website hosting information about Chinese censorship, circumvention tools, or what's happening. So because of that reason, we believe, I think we hypothesize that they were targeted a distributed denial of service. And because people have studied Chinese national firewall so much, there was the understanding who is behind this distributed denial of service attack was really easier. So there is a value on having information about how these systems are blocking the information and so on and so forth. How to measure internet censorship? So I want you guys to focus on a broader picture of internet censorship. It's like a larger scale censorship measurements, like censorship measurements that covers many countries, let's say the whole globe. How can we do that? Specifically, we want to think about, we want to know for a user in, let's say, a city in China, being able to connect to a server in Sweden. And we want to know for all the users in the internet connecting to all the servers that existed. How can we do such a large scale study? Well, the state of art, how, like the most intuitive way of thinking about it is like, well, we can instrument the user or the site to run measurements to collect this data. For example, a user can run a software, or we can give away Raspberry Pi that are equipped to run measurement from them. Ripe Atlas, you know, doing that, or OONI probes are samples of that. And as you can expect that all these direct measurements depend on volunteer participation. So you need to find people to ask them to help you out. And that's a very, very labor-intensive task. And then, of course, then you have an issue of coverage. You need to find all the peoples in all these countries. So coverage is a big issue. There is also something with respect to internet censorship that stands out, which is risk management. We want to be able to, when you're communicating with the end user or volunteer to participate, you need to be able to tell them this measurement you're running is risky. And hey, we don't know how to quantify it. We don't know the law of your countries. We're not familiar what is going to piss your government up. So you're on your own in that regard, but know that you're contributing to a big cause. So there is ethical issue with respect to that. And when you depend on the end user participation, all of you guys know that they're gonna, the measurement is not gonna be continuous. So it's gonna be one day the measurement is gonna happen, the network will go down, someone is gonna turn off the laptop and not run a measurement. So the data is not gonna be continuous. So to be able to learn something from the not continuous data, it requires a lot of systematic work. I want to give a shout out to OONI, one of the projects that I know about them from like 2012 when they was starting it. When they started thinking about this project and launching it and working on that, I was one of the skeptical people. I said that how can these guys find people everywhere? I mean, how can they get a consent from the users running measurements. This seems like a lot of work. But over the past 6 years, they have done quite an amazing job. They incentivize participation in OONI really well for people. So just a quick summary of how OONI works. They have a software that you can install on your desktop, or you can receive a OONI Raspberry Pi, or you can actually run an app on your Android or iOS, everything basically. And then you can, after you look at the, you have to agree to a consent. And after that, they start, you can say that, hey, I want to run a measurement now. So you launch a measurement. First, it's going to be the experiment that you're interested or they are interested. And then as a control, they create another measurement through a Tor network. And the understanding is that if the results they get back from Tor is equivalent of the results they did through the test network, then, okay, there is no censorship. But if not, well, might be evidence of censorship, but they don't make a call because they know that Tor is subject to some sorts of discriminations of its own. So, and there are a lot of false positive can happen. And the way to confirm it, that they go further and say that if we receive a block page, then we know that's basically a block page, so it's being blocked. So how they deal with this ethical challenge? For a long time, they attended every possible conferences, debates, panels to discuss that. Hey, how can we tell people from different culture, different countries, different political situation, different economy, how we can tell them about the risks? And so everywhere in their page, everywhere in their policy, they try to explicitly say that, hey, if you're participating, your government will know that. And that's how far they could go, basically. That was their best, one of the good efforts they made. The other the other one that I appreciated a lot is they attended a lot of local events, and they talked to activists and civil society organization that specifically focuses on different regions. So they tried their best to communicate with the locals and say that, okay, is that safe? Should we run? And because the team is super dedicated, they are very good at stopping the measurement. When things go wrong, you can trust them that these guys are going to be on the right side. How about the coverage? So how do they convince people to run the measurements? Well, again, I'm impressed at how many people around the world download their app or running the measurements for them. This is the data I found from their website. You can see that for a while they weren't as popular or they weren't collecting as many measurements, but in the past year, because of the lot of networking, advertisement, good marketing, good communications, and so on, they actually ended up having a good network of users to participate in measurements. And I want to give a shout out to the grant agencies that supported their work because, for example, OTF has been one of the biggest supporters so that they actually have financial support to go to different countries to give a talk about the work to try to make it happen. Okay, this was one of the successful projects that I talked about. Still, the fact that the user has to give a consent was bothering me. And I strongly didn't wanted to ask people who I cared about, like activists, to participate. Because they will. We know they will. And if you're talking about measurement in China, for example, at the wrong time, like a demonstration or so on, activists are the first people who are going to jump in and run measurements directly from their laptops. And if the government is smart enough, they just need to fingerprint, let's say, OONI, and they will realize who is running the measurements, and that's how they can be found. So I started thinking about this problem differently. And the idea that I was pursuing was as simple as looking at the IPv4 and saying that all these machines are running somehow following some certain protocols existed. Now the question is, how can I use these machines to run measurements from them? And I'm not talking about exploiting, running a bot on them and make them a participant in a measurement. No, but is there any specification in the protocols that I can use to be able to learn about internet censorship? So, specifically, I was interested to learn about, is there a way that I can use infrastructure machines? Machines belong to the government themselves to measure internet censorship from them. So my advisor, Jed Kurandel at the time, and I invented a technique called the spooky scan, or a hybrid idle scan, which is a TCP side channel, help you to measure whether a user and a site can talk to each other, and if not, in which direction the packet is being dropped. And let me emphasize that. You can measure that without being in the path or without exploiting any of the party. How can you do that remotely off the path? So I'm going to talk about this through the talk and explain how this can happen. But in the past couple of years, I thought about how can we, after inventing that technique, we were thinking about how can we come up with systems that are scalable and statistically robust, so we can run these measurements weekly and collect data about TCP/IP reachability globally. And so we came up with a technique called Augur, a follow-up work. So how does it work? It's preaching to a choir. You guys know about TCP, obviously, but just as a background, for any connection that is based on the TCP, there is a TCP handshake. There is a SYN, SYNAC, and ACK. And in each of the packets, there is a header, in the header, TCP header, there is a field called identification. And it's there for fragmentation reasons. And when the packet is sent, there's one IP ID. When the response comes, there's another IP ID. And I will come back to that. There's a part of the protocol said that if you send a SYNAC to a machine, when the port is open or closed, then it's going to send you a reset back because it's an unsolicited SYNAC that it's received. There's another part of the protocol saying that because TCP is basically resilient, when you send a SYN and you didn't receive a SYNAC, you have to keep repeating it. If you send a SYN and you send a SYNAC back, if you didn't receive the ACK or reset or FIN, so you have to retransmit it. And for different operating systems, there is different number of repetitions of the retransmission of the SYNAC. So these are the properties in a protocol. I'm not inventing them, it's just there. And for the spooky scan to work, I need to find the users, or we call it reflector in a paper, but I need to find the users that maintain a global IP ID, which means the value of that identification field should be globally assigned. It means that that value, no matter who the destination is, when it's being created and it's putting there, it's going to be incremented by 1. So just tell me, if you're looking at the global IP ID value of a machine and it shows you changes, what that does represent? It represents the noise of the machine, how many other packets it sends. From the first query you send to the second. The difference would tell you the noise of the machine. And of course, the site that I'm interested should have an open port and respond like Facebook and so on. And the measurement machine, me, should be able to spoof packets. Yes, I know spoofing has been used for malicious stuff and attacks and so on and so forth, but this is one example where spoofing is going to be used in the right way. It's hard to get to convince the ISP to let you spoof, but I have been successful in doing so. So how does a spooky scan work? So imagine that I found a reflector or global IP ID machine in China, and I'm checking whether a Tor relay or a website is reachable. What I do is first sending a SYNAC packet to a client or user. As a result, because it's unsolicited SYNAC, it's going to send me a reset. So what's going to happen is I will learn what is the IP ID value right now. Then what I do is I send a spoof SYN packet to the site with the IP of the reflector as a source IP. What's going to happen is the site is going to send a SYNAC back to reflector. That guy is going to send a reset back to the site. But as a result of that communication, the IP ID is going to change because I told you this is a global IP ID. It's a globally assigned, sorry. If I then again ask, what's the current value of your IP ID? I'm going to see a jump of 2. Like the diff the IP ID is, diff is going to be 2. So I learn that these two communicated. If I do ask again, there's not going to be, in a noiseless model, there's not going to be any change. So now consider a scenario when there is a firewall between the site and the user. So everything is the same, and the site, the packets that site will send, it's not going to get to the reflector. And by the way, look, SYNAC went there, no response. So it's going to be retransmitted 3 times. But what I see as a measurement machine, I would see that the IP ID diffs being 1 and 1. Now, and the third case, when the blocking happening from other direction, from the client to the site. So the SYNAC will get there. The reset will be generated. The IP ID will change, and I will observe the change. But there are other retransmitted SYNAC is going to happen as well. So there are going to be jumps of the IP ID in a continuous IP ID queries. So let me put them together. I have 3 cases where the site to reflector is being blocked, or no direction, or reflector to site. And I have different IP ID diffs, 11, 21, 22. Theoretically speaking, they are recognizable. You can detect them and differentiate them. I'm sure right now you're saying that, well, these are machines with the noise. They're talking to many people. This global IP ID value is going to be noisy and so on. And I agree with you. So there are different techniques that we developed to be able to deal with that. For example, instead of sending 1 spoof SYN, we can send 10. We can send n spoof SYN. So we can see that the diff is going to be 1 plus noise, whatever, 1 plus n plus noise, or 1 plus n noise and 1 plus n noise in the second diff. So basically, you can amplify the signal in a way that you can detect it. And also because there is a packet drop happening, the machine might receive a burst of the noise or something. We need to repeat the measurement to eliminate the effect of those. So that's how a spooky scan worked. Any question?
Teresa Engert, have you had any problems with stateful firewalls on the path from the reflector to the web server?
So basically, if the firewall is a stateful, I cannot use the spooky scan. But the problem, the benefit of the spooky scan is like we're using it to measure internet censorship in a national level. So you can see that the national level firewalls usually cannot be a stateful because there's millions of packets going back and forth. And there are going to be distributed nodes, like let's say DPIs. So synchronizing that and keeping a state, it's really hard.
But I was thinking you would get false positives because the stateful firewall, if it's not like the national censorship firewall, it is going to drop the traffic, but it's not like that firewall that you're seeing, but some other.
So another good point, I'm trying to abstract the topic, but not mentioning about these details. So the way to deal with the false positive is to having a control measurements. So if and you can eliminate like false positive like that, if connection to a domain that you know that should not be blocked, it's a control, let's say my own web server. If that shows blocking, then you figure out that's not censorship. That's actually something went wrong, and it can be even network failure.
Okay, thank you, by the way, for this work. It's really a cool idea. Cool.
Marcelo Bañulo. So one question. Basically, if I understand correctly, you're using this mechanism to get one machine to talk to another machine that is probably censored.
Yeah. You're pointing at ethics right now?
Sorry?
Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, wouldn't that potentially put in trouble one of the machines?
I will discuss that for sure. Okay. I just stopped here because I removed some of the details about the technique which you asked, so I wanted to make sure everybody noticed. But good question. Okay.
Stefan,
we're in the middle of the talk. We're not.
Yeah, Stefan Bortsmeyer. So maybe you will also tell me that is only a detail and you will talk about it later. But first, having a global ID should be deprecated precisely to avoid this sort of leaks. So
coming up.
Okay. And then you only measure IP connectivity, but many censorship techniques use DPR.
Coming up.
Okay. Sorry for being impatient.
No. I just wanted the question to be specific about the slides I'm covering. So anyway, so how the Augur Framework, if I want to run it in a larger scale, these are the basic steps. So what we do is we scan the IPv4, try to find the global IP ID machines. We decide what countries we're interested, and we find the reflectors or the global IP ID machines that are suitable. It means that they are not as noisy, because some of them are really noisy and detecting the noise out of noise is really harder. So we just eliminate those. And then we decide what sites we are interested, what type of measurements, the censorship measurement we want to run, and characterize those sites. And then what we do, we schedule measurements in a way that we make sure that no site and a reflector are running measurement at the same time. So we don't have like one measurement affect the other one and so on and so forth, and then get the measurement running.
I think there's a question from Jabber, which is, if quick is censored, does this give you any indicators at all? So,
no.
Okay.
No, absolutely. So after that probing, then we start running our detection and validation, and at the end, our output is going to be this reflector to site blocking observed for these countries, and this percentage of the nodes we used show that. So we started talk, and throughout the talk, we talk about the coverage being an issue. So how this Augur is going to help with that? There are more than 22 million machines that are running global IP ID, that are following the global IP ID behavior. And if you're asking, what are those machines? Well, there are Windows XP, FreeBSD, I can tell you, like Windows 7, for example, is not like that. Linux new versions, they randomized it, and so on. And like the direct measurements, right, Atlas is doing the best, and there are 10,000s. So you see how different it is. Who was the person who stood up? Yeah, you were talking about ethics, and you're damn right about that. Basically, the reflector doesn't know that somebody is participating in these measurements and might not want to. So how do we deal with that? Well, the solution that we came up with is walking away from end users. Let's use routers, infrastructure routers, and not end users. So what we do, we actually looked at the KDOS ARC traceroutes data, and we choose IPs that are 2 hop back from the end user's IP, and we use those as a vantage point. And of course, it affects the coverage. It's become 53,000, but 53,000 is already good enough. It covers a lot of countries and so on. Is that good enough for you? I shouldn't have asked.
I don't know much about censorship, sorry. But so I'm just wondering if wouldn't that put in trouble of the owner of this router? The owner
Yeah,
of this router is sending packets to some site that is supposed not to be.
Yeah, absolutely. So the argument here is that this router is going to be a core router, it's going to be ISP's router, it's going to be organization router. And if there is a CNAC, ANAC, it's not as a complete handshake, it's just a CNAC and reset, CNAC and reset. They can easily explain that, or it's very easy for them to justify that.
Okay.
Look,
I have more than 2 routers in my home.
is it too hop back?
Sorry?
Is it too hop back from the?
From my laptop, yes.
Well, that.
I'm just saying.
And is it a subject of like a measurement by CADA? Like, would CADA consider that a?
I don't know.
Yeah. So that's basically we're using their database and intersect that.
Okay.
And also, aren't you? Your laptop is going to be a private IP, isn't it?
My laptop would be a private IP, yes.
So it wouldn't be too hop back.
Right. Okay.
Cool. And another thing that I want to point here is what is the other option that we have? Just think about it. If this bothering you that like there's a CNAC and reset, then the other option is we're asking people to participate. So we're trying to minimize the risk here. We're not saying there is no risk. There is. I argue that there is no approach that someone can come with that there is zero risk, because you never know what you're dealing with. So about the continuity, of course, when you're dealing with routers and you're running measurement from routers, the chance that they go down or they stop working is really low. So it's not like end users changing network or start measurement and stop it. So to show that this Augur stuff actually works in practice, we selected almost 2,000 reflectors from different countries. And we chose 2,000 sites or domains. Half of them were from Citizen Lab, an organization which is located in Toronto, actually, and it's a nonprofit organization that keep track of the domains that are being blocked somewhere around the world. And the other thousands were Alexa's top 10K, or randomly selected from Alexa's top 10K. And the argument was, well, we should use this Alexa as a control because there are less censored domains in Alexa because they're popular, versus Citizen Lab, which is actually a list of censored domain. We ran this measurement and we collected the data, and we looked at the website to see whether it makes sense or not. We saw, for example, human rights websites appeared at the top, or for example, LiveJournal. But we also saw something else, which was track.com. And this is an example of a false positive that we couldn't explain why. And by digging further, we found out that AMTrack is using a DNS service that redirect to IP that other sensitive, like let's say, other sites are also being redirected to that IP, and that IP is being blocked. So it's like a collateral damage. And actually, we have a publication right now which studied that phenomenon in a deeper. How many domains are being blocked because of collateral damage? So that is coming up soon. Next, we looked at how many of the websites are reflector to the site being blocked. And we saw, for example, NSA.gov stayed at the top. And considering the nature of the site, you can assume that it's the site itself blocking certain countries. It's like a server side deciding that, oh, well, this client, I don't want to have them contact me, which makes sense. A government website usually do that. And that's another follow-up research that we have done, which is how many other servers are blocking content to different regions just because they don't see revenue. What does the server-side blocking look like? So there is another work that we have been investigating that. And we can, yeah, maybe. So, so you mentioned that, oh, well, this is just a TCP IP blocking and only even detecting the CNAC reset. It's not even a stateful. So what else? What about the rest? So we came up with a system, IRIS or satellite, both of them are the same basically, which actually try to detect DNS poisoning or manipulation remotely. And the way we do that is basically choosing open DNS resolvers, but there are, like, let's say there are 11 million open resolvers out there, but only the ones that we could prove or we could show that they are infrastructure resolvers. They don't belong to the end user. They're not open resolver by accident. So basically we look at their whois record, and if there are name servers, we only choose them. So from 11 million resolvers that are out there, out of which 6 million are working correctly, and out of which we only use 14,000 of them. And then we develop this satellite that can detect DNS manipulation remotely from all these 166 countries. I cannot go deep on how we do that, but you can imagine, or you can read the paper. Well, what about the next layers? How do you detect, for example, TLS or SNI blocking or keyboard blocking? How do you do that remotely? Well, we thought a long time about this problem because my understanding, when I was thinking about this problem, my understanding was like, to get to the application layer, there should be a TCP handshake, and there should be a client establishing that handshake to the site. And I cannot do that without exploiting the client or the user. How can I do that? Like, and that was the block. I was blocked there. I was like, oh, well, how can I get to the application? But internet is always surprise you. But I forgot. Let me just say what I mean by application layer. So China, for example, does a lot of keyboard blocking or SNI blocking. Basically, if you establish a handshake from your computer to the server, and then you send a GET request, and they see that, for example, it's for google.com, then that keyword caused the DPI to act, and they send a reset to the both party. That's how China does it. The other countries, like for example, when they see a keyword that they don't like, they basically drop every connection. They just don't send anything back. So that was the example of keyword blocking. But how did we resolve this problem? It turns out there is a protocol called ECHO, which is RFC 862. And it is a predecessor to ping. Whatever you send to that protocol, like that port 7, which is running ECHO, it's going to send you back. Like whatever you send, it's going to get you back. So it's going to echo it back to you. So then the question was like, how can we use ECHO for our youth? Obviously, from a measure machine, we can craft a GET request, GET HTTP request, and send it to the ECHO server. It's going to send back to us, exact same thing. And if there is a DPI in between, it's going to react because that packet is going back and forth. And yeah, it works. So basically, that's what we do. We actually first have a control, a domain that is not being blocked, and then we actually check for google.com or many other keywords, and based on the difference from the response from the control versus the experiment, we detect it's being interfered in path or not. Our system Quack is capable of running thousands of measurements at the same time from 180 countries or so. And we have almost more than, I forgot the date. We have more than 50,000 ECHO servers around the world, basically everywhere. Yeah, that's one. And that's basically solving that problem. So where I'm heading, side channels and the designing them are really hard, and the information you learn from them is not as much as a direct measurements like OONI can get. So I'm leading a project called Sensor Planet, which tries to run all these techniques weekly and collect data from all these countries. And then our goal is to join force with OONI, which do analysis in a more detailed way, to come up with basically censorship, a data repository for censorship measurements, and so on and so forth. So now we're in a stage of visualizing all the data that we have and compare the results and learn about those. Cool, that was the talk. Any question?
There's about 10 minutes for questions. I said if there are questions, we've got about 10 minutes in the schedule for them.
Okay, let's start with a DNS question. Using the Open Resolver, because the IETF says that it's bad, Open Resolvers are typically not the real resolvers used by people. And at least in Western Europe, where DNS lying resolvers is the most common censorship technique, Open Resolvers will not see the same thing as a regular resolver of a big ISP. So I'm wondering, for instance, was your tool able to detect censorship in Western European countries like that?
Yes. So what we do is we develop a series of heuristics. For example, we have our own domain, let's say censorplanet.org, our own site. And we use the open resolvers and check whether it works. Like, does it resolve that domain that we know it should resolve correctly or not? So that's basically, that's like consistency check for the open resolvers. And then we also check, for example, for that domain that basically we're interested. The IP that is getting resolved. We go to that IP, and if it's running HTTPS, for example, we look at the cert we get from there, and the cert that we get from like TLS, and the one that we get from the control, and are they equal or not? If it's equal, then we say that's not censorship. So there is a series of tests that we do. Then if the response is passing any of these heuristics, then we say that okay, it's not censorship. However, if it doesn't pass any of them, not necessarily we cannot say it's censorship. Then we go through, okay, can we actually check this IP and see a block page or not? So we have all these steps that we go through till we said, okay, this is interfered. But
in that case, I was mostly thinking about false negative. I mean, the open resolver will give you the correct answer, then you will think it's okay, while actually it's not, because the real resolvers would give you a wrong answer, but you cannot query them.
If the open resolver give us a correct answer, what's your issue with that?
The issue is a false negative. I mean, in most Western European countries, censorship is implemented by lying DNS resolvers. Typically, they are the resolvers of big ISP. Yeah. You cannot query them from the outside. Open resolvers, on the other hand, are small forgotten machines, badly managed, etc. Yeah. But they are not the real resolvers used by the real users.
I see what you're saying. So you're saying that if the user is using a local resolver and local resolver that it's using is being poisoned, we won't be able to detect that.
No. I'm saying that the typical user uses the resolver of the ISP, yeah, and you cannot query this resolver, because it's not an open resolver. So you don't see what the typical user sees unless you use things like OONI or Atlas, etc.
Yeah,
but from the outside, you can query only open resolvers, and open resolvers are very different from the real resolvers.
I'm not sure whether they're very different, because our results that through the using open resolvers and the results that the other we already knew about them were basically we could confirm them, we validate our results. So I don't think they're that, but I see I agree with you that we necessarily don't see the user's response, and maybe our granularity is not as deep. And I agree. That's one of the limitations of the technique that we have. And that's why I think that's exactly what I was emphasizing, that there is a need for both of OONI and Planet to join force their efforts.
Are there any other questions for Raya? Yes, okay.
Hi,
Please give your name.
Rafael, my question is about, I'm curious actually, what kind of studies that you were very willing to do, but that you might violate one of your three, or one of two actually, or ethics only, that you're like tempted to do, but you couldn't do because of ethics, that you see some opportunities?
There is an example that I can talk to you offline about it, but let me come up with the example that I can say it. Nice catch.
Yeah, if it feels like an offline conversation, then you should probably
Yeah.
leave it as an offline conversation.
Go.
Please.
Yeah, I'm not going to.
Niels ten Hoover, University of Amsterdam. Can you give a bit of explanation on how you came up on using the ECHO protocol? Because there must be like some weird magic good story there, I reckon.
Yeah, absolutely. So I told you, it was 3 years we were banging our head into this problem. Like I really needed a solution, something like as cute as ECHO. And we, all of this, so actually, I can say that. And we were all chilling and having fun and not thinking about censorship.
And then you were reading early RFCs.
But we were thinking about the history of how network diagnostic tools worked. And one of the people were saying that, hey guys, have you heard about this predecessor to ping? Ping is like simplified, but there is something that you can send and back, and it's running on port 7. There's another one called discard in port 8. Like you send it and you just discard it. So you can actually check the direction that way. And then immediately after, like in that even bar, I just stopped. I was like, this is it. Seriously, this is it. And I asked one of the students there to run a measurement and see whether this protocol is deployed. And University of Michigan has one of the best network to run internet-wide scanning. And the student came like in the morning at 9 a.m., like literally like, I believe there is like 50,000 running this. And we basically went out after that. The technique was developed in like matter of a week or a week and a half. It was just like, we needed to hear that. But I can tell you a follow-up to that work. So basically the follow-up to that work, which is my undergrad is doing, is using HTTP servers that are organizational HTTP server within the countries. So what we do is we are sending a HTTP GET request for google.com from, let's say, I don't know, government.ru. And of course, it's not hosted there. So they're going to send us something back and saying that, oh, the content is not available here or God knows what. And we do that for a control, which is the domains that we know is not going to be censored. A random string, get request random dot, let's say, whatever. And then we do that for a domain that we know it's sensitive. And then we develop a technique to be able to differentiate the control measurement versus the response that we get when there is a interruption happening in between. So this is the next step of ECHO. And I can share the paper. This is going on right now. So.
Super elegant.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. And I'm hoping that we see more of you
Absolutely.
other than just for invited talks, because getting measurement of effects into this group would be a wonderful thing.
I'm hoping that I hear about these RFCs that are going to help us to come up with more, because as one of you mentioned, the global IP ID is not going to stay around, hopefully, for that long. But so. Yeah.
Thank you. Okay, Niels. I skipped over the hackathon. I was so eager to get to the talk that I skipped over your opportunity to talk about the hackathon. So if you would give us a couple minutes, report on that, it would be helpful. And I've got the blue sheets. There are more people here than there were.
Yeah, so at the hackathon, we were with several people working on public interest technologies. There was and several people are here, so if I misrepresent you, please tell me I'm doing so. There have been people working on MLS and actually have come up with somewhat of an MLS implementation, came along problems, came along solutions, so that was useful. People have been working on 451. We especially had super good contributions from Mauritius, where the group there has been improving the Drupal plugin for 451, and some other work on 451 has been happening as well, because I think the measurement plugin was improved by ELP, right? Some work on that, yes. And then we've been working on doing interviews for the human rights review for Quick, but that's actually a teaser because we'll talk about that later in this session.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so the next section we're going through is the draft updates for the various drafts being worked on. The first one I had on the list was anonymity. But no slides, so please, Stefan.
Stefan Bortsmeyer. Sorry, no real news about this draft. There have been no activities. There was one review by Wendy with a lot of good remarks. But apart from that, I didn't notice any activity. So wondering if there, we could always publish something, but it seems to me that it wouldn't be a very collective work. So it may be a problem.
Okay, yeah, I'd like
Yes.
to ask, have people been reading it? Do they have no comments on it? How many people have read it, the anonymity? So a lot of people have read it. Does nobody have any comments on it? Or you have comments and you just haven't gotten around to saying anything? Please, yeah, go to the mic.
I think it is still relatively wireframey, so I think it also depends a bit on where would you like, maybe you could shepherd us a bit, because I could provide reviews and say you could look there and there, we could add and this, or could like start dramatically typing large pieces of text, but that might also be going in different directions all over. I already have that with the draft I write myself, so so if you give a bit some instructions of what you would like and what kind of input you would like, then I guess the providing input would be easier. But I think there is a lot of interest in it, and yeah.
That's simple, any input. No, seriously, of course I'm lazy, so I prefer that people send text that I just have to copy and paste, but any input would be useful by showing that there is interest and by guiding about what is interesting. Again, it's not a personal work. It's not like if I write a book or an article on my blog and things like that. It has to reflect the opinion of the working group. Otherwise, it's less useful.
So perhaps between the two of us, we can help motivate something. Yes, please.
Stephen Farrell. So I think, I haven't read this for quite a while. I think it's the same comment I had previously, is that anonymity is like really, really hard towards impossible. And I don't think the draft gets that across or in sufficient detail. So because I think one issue that it would be useful to have in a document like this, and I didn't offer text, so
Right.
pardon me, is that there's a lot of people think by doing X I can get anonymity, and that's just not true. And I think it would be great if this draft made it plain that that's the case.
That sounds like a good piece of text to contribute.
But then in general, it's hard, or this and this is why it's hard and why layer 2 is making it a problem, etc. And you could think of this, or what?
So again, I haven't got text to offer, sorry. Maybe I'll try and do that, but you know, sometimes you hear people say, well, let's just encrypt it and it'll be anonymous. And that's plainly not true. So I think that should be bleeding
content.
obvious when you look at this document, so that people don't make that mistake. And then maybe after that, all you need is examples, or maybe more, I'm not sure.
But that could fit then in the problem statement, right? That doesn't need to be like a separate part, or do you think it would be?
Might be a good part.
Yes, I think that the anonymity draft is a good place to discuss some of the things that this research group might have been set up to discuss, which is that anonymity in law is a relative concept. So you can be anonymous if it's sufficiently economically difficult for somebody to re-identify you, because a judge or a regulatory authority, they will determine everything on a case-by-case basis, considering normally the facts only at hand. Whereas in computer science, the concept of anonymity needs to be generalizable and applicable in many different situations. And that's why in the computer science model, normally you would say anonymity is close to impossible, because there's always going to be some case where you cannot guarantee the anonymity in a system. Whereas from the legal kind of human rights framework perspective, anonymity works as an abstraction which can then be applied generically from case to case. So I think that could be reflected in the draft, and I have some good source materials for this as well, which I'm happy to share in an informal setting.
Fantastic. Thank you.
I can add also one thing, that anonymity is probably one of the areas of computer network security and privacy where there is the widest gap between what non-experts think and what experts know. I mean, as Stefan said, a lot of people claim that their database is anonymous, something like that. And there is always a gap between the expert and the non-expert, but when it comes to anonymity, it's an ocean.
Well, of course, capture or closing that gap is part of
But
the
it's
whole
not,
enterprise here.
yeah, but it's not draft bullshit police, right? It's draft anonymity, so we don't need to like say everything that's not correct in the world.
Okay. That was good discussion on anonymity. Who's doing the, is it Niels or Gisela that's doing the association draft? Okay, is she online and wanting to talk? I see her, but I don't see her in the queue asking to talk. Do I? Ah, yes, now I press the red button. You should be able to talk now if I did it right.
Hi, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yep. Okay. You're a little quiet, but otherwise, and the presentation is queued up. So tell us when to change slides, I
Okay,
guess.
perfect. Can you hear me better than there? I have headphones on now.
Now you're very loud and garbled.
Okay, I think this should work. Thank you very much, Avery, and please let me know if we have any sound problems. I have the most reliable Wi-Fi I could find in Cape Town. Okay, we're going to present to you our draft number 5. If you can please go to the next slide. Well, I think at this point now, we're what we kind of wanted to do is
Speak a little softer. It really is.
I think that's better, right?
Hard.
Okay.
Actually, yeah.
Let me just leave that naturally there, and my hair gets in the way. Okay, so what we kind of wanted to do at this point in the draft was to go over all the changes that we've made, given the great discussions that we've had in the list and in this forum, and also will incorporate all the doubts and confusions that were put forward. Just to make this point, it's one of the things that I like the most about the draft. Infrastructure is often taken for granted, and I think in this context, human rights are also taken for granted sometimes. When we worry too much about technology and infrastructure, then association is seen as merely people or things coming together and not necessarily as something that we also have to build on from a normative perspective. Next, please. So these are two research questions. You know them very well. Well, the first one at least. The second one has been tweaked and changed, so we could make the methodology a little bit better. So the affordances of internet architecture in terms of the right to freedom of association and assembly, and then if the internet is used for association and assembly, what are the consequences? This was modified because we eliminated section 6.3. I will get to that further on. Next, please. The objective, it's very much what we've been talking about, expanding and deepening this relationship between rights and protocols. And Niels, I think you wanted to talk about non-objectives.
Yeah, so what I think is important, we've been working on this draft quite a bit. And initially we have added a lot of stuff. And then about 2 meetings ago, we have started deleting stuff. And I'm afraid that if we might change direction again, then we need to go, then we're going through the process a couple of times again. So that's why I just wanted to remind people what we've been trying to do here. And that is that we want to try expand and deepen relation between specific rights and protocols. So it's like a more individualized per right version of RFC 8280. So in this sense, you could see that this is like going deeper in the research field of RFC 8280, but not in the field of application. So we're not trying to analyze specific protocols for HR impact, because that is what we're doing in the review team. And we're also not trying to produce new guidelines, because that's more like the application of RFC 8280, about which we'll talk in a bit. And this is more the speculative and theoretical research. So I think that we should really have a clear in mind what we're trying to do here and in this draft, because that hopefully provides a frame for the discussion. Back to you, Gisela.
Just to make consensus flow a little bit better, we completely deleted section 6.3 regarding the discussion on the Internet as Association and what that would mean in terms of ASs. I think Niels frames it really well when saying the obligation to pass packets. We discussed on the list if we should touch upon net neutrality or not, but in the end, we just decided to eliminate all of this because it was causing too much noise and too much confusion. This led us to clean up the conclusion and typos, and also taking into consideration what Mallory suggested last session, rather than determining the relationship between ASs and association, we thought it would be more interesting to explore if the nature of the activity was an association itself. So I know it seems like a small thing, but I think in terms of methodology, it really makes sense. Next, please.
No, for us, it was a big thing, and there's a lot of new work coming up on this. So that I deleted it, but it hurt so much that I'm now prepping a new draft and new documents on that. So hopefully I got the problem out of this, and then we'll have it back as a zombie.
And I'm like, yeah, it was a small thing. It's a grammatical thing, but no, I guess it is a bigger thing sometimes. Next, please. Okay, so we also thought it was important to talk about a little bit about the methodology, especially because this overview does not aim to cover all the possible ways in which people can organize or reach out. It's obviously an ethnographical approach. It's taken certain experiences and then abstracting from there. We definitely do not want to cover everything. And I really, as a human rights lawyer, I don't think we need to cover anything to make a human rights impact assessment consideration. And then, of course, the part of the literature review, which I think is really rich. There were some doubts and confusion last session regarding somebody, I don't remember well who, but somebody asked, why are you being really explicit with all the technical arguments in this draft? And from my perspective, again, as a human rights lawyer, IETF drafts are not only being read by engineers these days, and I really want to underline this. IETF drafts should and must be read by a lot of other people that are also in the policy arena. So that's why it's important to have a clear literature review and a clear set of definitions in the draft. Next, please. This is, well, I don't want to talk a lot about this. I don't know, Niels, do you have something to say about the last slide? Okay.
No.
Okay. And well, here are our conclusions. Niels, I'll shoot it over to you so you go over them.
Yeah, so we established a relationship between assembly association and the internet, and we derived that from the different cases. We link it between protocols. Then we talk a bit about the affordances of centralized and decentralized, and then on the trends on interoperability and federation and centralization that Stephen brought up, that is also included now. So that is pretty much the draft as it is. It's not, it does what it says out to do. So, and we removed the parts that were problematic. So I think it is pretty tight, does what it says. So I'm very curious to comments or questions or disagreements. Last time, everyone seemed to agree except for point 6.3. 6.3 is dead. So I hope we can adopt and continue with this work. So I'll be curious to hear what you have to say.
Okay, I open it up to discussion and I'll ask that question. But before that, Mallory has to leave to catch her plane. So I wanted to say goodbye to my new co-chair already, and I'll talk to you soon. You're gonna stick around for this piece. Okay, but while you're packing up and gathering all and finding all the pieces of pens that are hiding under the tables and such. Okay, so I don't know, getting back to the story at hand. How do people feel about adoption? I don't see anybody at the microphone with things to say. Niels did make the point that what was bothering people last time has been removed. So should this be adopted? Is there any objection to adopting this in the room or that? Yes.
Wendy Seltzer, I wouldn't frame it as an objection, but I didn't find the framing compelling to me as the connection to protocols. And maybe I just missed it, and the level of abstraction didn't seem quite right.
Is that something that the group and you could help the draft find once we adopted it? Or do you think?
I shared comments on the list, and since I'm not able to see what would make it more compelling, it's not one that I'm going to be able to spend effective time on. So if everyone else sees places that they want to help improve it, I am certainly appreciative of your efforts.
Thank you. Anyone else wish to comment on it at this point? Yes, Stefan.
Stefan Bartsmeyer. Just a practical problem. We adopted 2 drafts, if I'm correct. We are discussing about adopting more, and it seems that HRPC is a bit less active than before, less people in the room, etc. So just be sure that we adopt on these things, that we will really be able to work on it, send reviews, remarks, etc. So this is being said, the draft, it's a good idea for me, and I really would like it to advance. But for the group point of view, we should always think of the not only what is nice and we would like to see, but also what we can do practically.
Okay, yeah. In terms of drafts at the moment, we have the guideline, which I think is going to be an ongoing piece of work that sort of matches with the reviews and as we learn, and I want to talk about that more later, and then the anonymity one that we mentioned. So adding a third, given that, but you're right, that may be a place where we'd want to stop if for a moment until we've seen real progress on things. I don't know, you were going to talk before I interrupted.
Well, I think we've seen a lot of work in the review team, and the review team focuses on the guidelines, and we've also seen again 2 versions of association and political. So, yeah, that's the...
Okay. Well, we'll take the question to the list then, since there's a little bit of ambiguity, but it seems like there's a sort of feeling that, yeah, we should pick at one more, this one looks like it may be a good one to take, to adopt, but let's try and see if we can get some more conversation going on it then. And yes, no, frowns, acceptance.
Well, we did everything the group asked to do,
You
right?
did everything, yeah.
So I'm not sure whether taking
How
it to...
would you answer Wendy's question?
Well, I've tried to answer that on the list, and then I looked at the different versions, and I think what we did is, so the level we did, and that's why actually was exactly the reason why I put in this. So I think the layer of abstraction is very similar, and also in the methodology, to RFC 8280. Namely, that we take the ethnographic approach, look at different protocols that are examples of implementations of those rights, do the description where there's an interrelation, and then come to the and draw conclusions from that, how there's a specific relation between those rights and protocols, and leave it at that. And then the other part is done in the review. So I'm not sure how another abstraction level would either be a higher level, and then it would not be specific rights or specific protocols, which it has a relation, or about specific protocols, and then we're not analyzing for association, and then it should be an exhaustive list. So I think the level of abstraction is inherent in the methodology that we're using, which is a very science technology studies thing. So it might be because of that.
If I can ask, but haven't we generally dipped into the protocols to show the connections and taken that step down the abstraction?
No, so the step down is from all human rights to association and assembly.
Right.
So it was to show that. So because the relation between freedom of expression and privacy is that's the one we always hear. So this one was used to try to break that open a bit and come up with a bit more discourse. So, and that's what it tries to do, and I think that's what it does. And then I went a bit crazy and started speculative adding things on ASs and obligations, and then the research group rightfully told me I should stop horsing around, and then I stopped horsing around.
And now you seem to have most of the group. I think that, as I said, even the one person that had a comment said it wasn't an objection. Just clarify it. I'll clarify it on the list, and then you probably didn't want to just quickly put out a different version with a different name, but you probably wanted to.
Yeah, just move
Right,
it along.
but the next time it moves along, it seems like a reasonable thing to do, and I don't notice anybody having any agita over it. Okay. Thank you.
Excellent.
Thank you. I don't think you go anywhere. Hi, yes, thank you, Isa. Thank you. Okay. And then Niels, you're next again, I believe. Are you political? Yes. Nah. Okay.
Let's push it a bit further.
It's really amazing. I've been doing nothing but touching screens with my fingers, and I actually forgot there was a mouse. That's there, and that's there. Yes, now that I know there's a mouse. I haven't used a mouse in so very long. Okay, and you have the clicker already.
Here we go again. Now on draft political. There's a bit about the same timeline. This fits in HRPC because we're trying to understand the impact of protocols, and the dynamics impacting protocols. So both on the output side as well as on the input side of our process. So we're trying to understand the political aspects of protocols, because in our research and on our list, we had several discussions, and it keeps on coming back about the neutrality of technology and the neutrality of protocols. And so we're doing this because the internet is a basic infrastructure of our information societies, and protocols are a very inherent for part of that. And so a part of this process is political, which includes economics, but it is not described in any RFCs. So what we do in RFCs is that we describe technical parts, but parts of our process are also impacted by economics, and is also ordering the infrastructure and society in other ways. And we think we should be taking that into consideration. We're not making any comment about whether that's good or bad, but we're simply saying this is a part of that, and then trying to argue with that with scientific literature. And so, and then need to take it into account in the decision-making process as well. And then making this explicit, it helps us to understand how to do that. And even though it is sometimes uncomfortable. Typos, it's a returning thing. I keep on making them and people keeping pointing them out. So that's good. So then we can keep on removing them. The thing that was very rightfully pointed out last time was that this was a bit of a potpourri of different ideas of how protocols are political, but it wasn't really neatly lined up. So I've been trying to create a new structure and flow to address that, and do better signposting. We were here, now we're going there, and this is where we are in the argument. I also created a new conclusion based on all the steps, and thank you very much, Gisela, for helping on the editing, as well as Mallory, who both wrote me in strong language and told me what I should do wrong, and that I should read my own drafts out loud, and that stuff would help. So where is this going? So the question is anything missing, or should we add stuff? And how does the research group think about where to take this? Is this still controversial? Is this something we feel comfortable with after 5 iterations? So I'd be curious to hear. Because there is a lot of literature on this stuff, and I could put in more and more and more, but I'd be very curious to hear whether you think we need more depth or more breadth, because I've now jumped into the literature of self-regulation, and it is far and deep and growing. So I'm not sure if we want to import more than we have, but I'm curious to hear what you think is useful.
Okay. Anyone have any comments? I see you're asking about adoption again. This one has one fewer author than the last one, right?
No, Amelia is co-author.
Oh, Amelia's on it also. Okay. And we've already been admonished not to adopt too many more.
But this has seen a lot of work.
Yeah, you've done a lot of work on a lot of things. So any comments on the draft, on its adoption? How many people have read it? Oh, so a lot of people have read it.
People do read.
People do read. How many think that it has a ways to go, that it belongs? Comments of any sort would be good.
Shivan Sahib, I think it's time you adopted this draft. I think it's really crucial to what we're trying to do with the research group. And I still have some issues with the language and stuff, but I think those can be solved as an RG.
Okay. Are there any other views, counter views, other than taking into account again Stefan's admonition that we shouldn't jump too many things adopted until we're going to start working on them a bunch? Yes.
So my highly reasoned opinion is
name, please.
Meh.
Meh.
Meh. Yeah.
What is it? What does your meh come from? What motivates your meh?
To lie down on the sofa and speak to us.
No, we're not trying to cure the meh. We're trying to understand the motivation.
I just reread it, and I'm not clear what it's for. to some extent. Now, maybe I need to read it carefully as opposed to just flick through it, because it's been a while. But
Can you give an elevator pitch of what it's for?
Sure. So it is. So we have talked about the 10,000 different ways in which some people see that the internet is neutral, and some people see it's not. So first, it documents that discussion.
Sure.
Then it does an overview of the literature that shows how different power structures have an influence in the development of protocols and standards bodies and in self-regulation, and how different and a position on technological determinism and social determinism of sociology. So there it shows like different the history of political thinking vis-a-vis standardization and standards bodies and standards and protocols. And then it comes to the conclusion that says, maybe we do not, this research group is not the place where to define exactly what political is, but the discussion and the literature definitely shows out that we should take it in consideration in the process of, in our own processes in making and producing and developing standards.
yeah, that's what I read. But still,
But you still think it's... Okay.
It's
I mean, I think so. More concretely, I think so. The discussion of different positions that people had about protocols being political or not. I mean, that text is fine, but and some of the background text is fine. But the conclusion just kind of baffles me. The conclusion is basically, here you go.
yeah, but I felt like this as well. But I think we should see this as modular building blocks, because every time I get too excited, I think rightfully so, also caught back by the research group, because I think with the work that we are doing in here is definitely not the same as the people necessarily all the people feel like outside of this room. So I think we have the building block that now we think that there is a level of politics involved in the production of standards, and then we can come up in next with an idea how you can take that into account. So I do not think we should try to kitchen sink all the problems about the politics of protocols into one draft.
So I guess it's not clear to me that. So you mentioned two things. One is documenting that there are political issues, and the second one is figuring out how to take them into account. It's not clear to me that doing the first without the second is really worthwhile.
So it's kind of like we're looking for a space between having taken out so much that you now find it non-controversial and meh, and you feeling that you're safe, and perhaps there's a place somewhere in the middle where.
But I think I was always meh about this one. So,
okay.
but that's just my personal opinions. But yeah, I mean, it's no. Again, I think the documentation of positions part is fine, but you say you did some more work in the conclusion. Again, maybe I need to read it properly, but.
And perhaps it needs more work by the whole group of us on conclusions.
Right. So the reason
some discussion.
The reason to express my meh is basically that
I'm happy to put more pepper in it. We can,
it doesn't have to be pepper, but
then what?
So let me finish the sentence. The reason I kind of am expressing that well-reasoned opinion is that there's always a tendency to adopt stuff, and then it just eventually kind of turns into an RFC at some point in the future. And I'm not sure if that's the right thing to do with this document or not. If we can't figure out first, is there going to be and what you do about it part that the research group takes on?
Okay. One of the thoughts that I've already had looking at these, but it's way too early to think about it, is a lot of these short things may not be RFCs by themselves, but they may be part of a bigger story. I don't know. It's just that, a lot of these single things, but perhaps they are pieces of work. So, but we could adopt it. I don't think it necessarily means it becomes an RFC. I think that's a different step. Otherwise, we would do both of them at the same time. Sorry. Yes?
I think if we start looking at, if we start making suggestions for implementing specific processes to include tweaks and do different things to take those things into account, I think that's a very different draft. I think this is very much the the theoretical underpinning for coming up for guidelines for the process. And we also mentioned some ways to go, like the UN Guiding Principles for Business and Human Rights. We've looked at that now on the protocol level, and then we could also think about those on the process level. But
Would you add guidelines to this one?
no, so I actually think that should not be in this draft, because or at least not right now. I think this is very good, because I think it's like we still hear a lot. Maybe you don't, but I hear it a lot. That like I still hear technology is neutral a lot here at the IETF, like a lot. And I want them to just answer this RFC number, this ID, you know, and then like.
Yes, please.
Georg Meyer, I haven't read this version, so that's why I held back before. When I read it like a while ago, I found it useful, and I just would like to understand if other people who have read the draft at the current version have an opinion on this, because I'm a bit surprised that we're now discussing to not adopt it. I thought it would go forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, actually, I don't think we'd gotten to the point of not adopting. It's still the should we question.
Okay.
So I think I hear some discussion about what's the purpose here, because it's a mixture of sort of research survey and some observations of the organization, which may or may not be necessarily a good study from this research group, just because of there are politics about observing the organization and its processes. That said, I don't know why you couldn't do a short thing, kind of like the pervasive surveillance, whose title is protocols are not value neutral, and includes some of the key things. If an important part of this for you is making sure that people can't easily say that they have no values, and there's plenty of material in here that could be transported to that, and then you could later think about where are the ways to comment on the process and the product and the organization.
Yeah, but that's exactly what I've been just trying to make that point, and then provide arguments with what's under that. So that's what I've been trying to do.
So sometimes less is more, as in the pervasive surveillance document. So maybe a less is more approach on this one. I mean, I know you've been doing a lot of revision, but sometimes less is more. I don't know if that would help with Stephen's concern.
Stephen Barley. Something like that would maybe even changing the title to say it's like really background and not like the title is a little bit overstating what's in the document from my point of view. But you know, so it's not on the politics of standards. It's like some background about politics and standards. If that was the title of the document, I probably would have no problem at all with it.
Okay, I'll work on the title.
Okay. So this one is kind of like, I'll take this one to the list too, but kind of a pending adoption. And you know, but we won't wait until next time. Okay, thank you. And I guess next is Siobhan. Oh, nice. Mice are so weird. Here's the clicker. Oh, it's just
it's two things. Hello, everyone. Siobhan. So there's a new version of the draft, SAI 451 new protocol elements. So it's actually in last call. Alexei Melnikov is the AD sponsor, still looking for a document shepherd. There was a lot of discussion about this. So I think I addressed most of the concerns related to the content in the new draft version, but feedback would be great. So basically, the recommendations that I'm sticking with are the two that were original, which was the geographical scope and the blocking authority disambiguation. Those seem to be accepted by everyone who did respond to the draft. And yeah, I guess the next steps for this would be to get the new draft reviewed again whenever people get around to it. And yeah, those are the links to the discussion in the draft. If anyone has specific comments right now, that would also be fantastic.
Any comments? And I guess it's time also to get them into the last call if you do.
Yep.
Yeah. Thank you. Okay. So now moving on to the next. And where we are next is, we're now going into the discussion of the review. Where's the agenda? Let me go back to the agenda here. Right, so basically, we've gone through all the drafts and we're now at the human rights review. And it was suggested, Niels, right, that basically we take the HR and architecture first, or how are you recommending we go on that?
Well, I think we have an overview of 3 or 4 human rights reviews. So if we discuss.
Is there a slide presentation on those?
Yeah,
I'm trying to.
I think there are slide presentations
Slide
on
presentation on that one.
on Suit, on
And-
Marnu, on Quick, and on Meeting Venue. So if we do all of those, and then we have an overview of the review work, and then we can maybe
Okay,
see
so
where
why
it
don't
is
we
going.
start in the order I've got them here? So yeah, the order I've got them here is the next one is on venue selection process. So Beatrice, that's you, okay. There's the clicker. Let me do that. Yep.
So we made a review of the IETF plenary meeting venue selection process draft. Our goals were to achieve further clarity in the statement regarding inclusiveness and affordability. We also requested a few additions to the basic venue criteria about gender neutral restroom, infant feeding room and family restroom, accessibility for non-smokers and folks with respiratory conditions. It will also encourage the discussion on matters that could be clarified better in the draft. So childcare spaces and services, and processing in case of conflicting requirements is, for example, if someone needs a service dog, but someone else is allergic to pets, which happens. So we got a very good response to the review. There were quite a lot of discussions, pretty long threads on the affordability of meeting venue because it wasn't very clear, and that relates to accessibility, of course, of the event. Plenty of discussion about accessibility for those with respiratory conditions. There were quite a lot of memories for an IETF meeting in Singapore where there were problems of this kind with mold. Very long discussion about childcare facilities and services with reference to problems that happen in Seoul, and gender neutral restrooms as well. So the outcomes are that the several items struck a chord with folks. The conversations were quite lengthy, but the organizational matters that we raised were deemed more relevant to event management. So they were not added to this draft, but there were suggestions to consider this type of informations and edits for documentation related to the event management and to information provided to participants about services and event infrastructure. That is it.
Any questions? A quick question from me.
Yes.
So it feels worth having done.
I do think so. I personally organized like 1,500 events for open source communities, and these are issues. I've heard these issues also coming up during the days in here. So yeah.
Okay, thanks. And using the questions and using that, do you have, and perhaps this isn't the time to talk about that, but comments on the methodology, comments on the guidelines, did any of that come out to you?
I wouldn't say that we directly used the human rights guidelines.
I was wondering.
It was kind of a different type of draft, but I think it was worth doing because it impacts the whole community here. So I think that every working group should care about the space where they want to meet. So that makes sense to me.
Yes, Niels.
Niels ten Hoever, University of Amsterdam. Could you talk a bit about the uptake of the review?
What do you mean?
So how was it? How did people respond to it?
People respond with very long and detailed conversations, as I said, especially about services that are not yet provided in the IETF meeting. So childcare, it's quite an issue. Also, like
specifying that spaces can be welcoming for folks who are non-smokers or who have respiratory problems is definitely something that became a very heated conversation because I was not there, but it seems like there was a previous meeting in a venue where there were mold problems and some people had quite, here it says, quite big problems in Singapore with that. And also there were big conversation about the affordability of the meeting venue. And I think we shouldn't underestimate this because there are so many conversations about the fact that the IETF community has problems with growing and doing outreach. But if the venue is unaffordable, it means that you are basically assuming that everyone that comes here has the level of privilege or having big funds to go very far 3 times a year. So the affordability of the venue is something that definitely impacts the community that you have here, which means that the protocol developers might tend to be white, Western, with a certain level of economic income, which then brings us back to the politics of protocols. Money is part of the conversation, so everything connects.
Thank you. Any other comments, questions? Great, thanks. Okay, the next one I had was the Marnu. Who's talking to that one? Thank you.
Yeah, so it's going to be very easy for me with this because there's actually only one slide. So I did this together with Siobhan when we read the Marnu report. This one slide summarizes what we did. So we found 3 principal problems with the text, which was it used non-neutral language in relation to specific stakeholders, describing some stakeholders as honest, and that would then imply that other stakeholders might not be honest, so we asked them to change that, which was an easy solution to the problem. In some parts of the report, we found that there was a mix of technical and regulatory requirements, and for clarifying to the readers of the report which requirements that were addressed during the workshops are technical requirements on the protocols and technologies being designed, and which are regulatory requirements applied to the economic space where actors are operating. That just makes it easier to understand also the human rights impact. We also recommended that they give more insights into QUIC and TCP and how that might help address some of the issues that were discussed in the workshop. And then we concluded with kind of general comments from the RFC 8280 human rights guidelines on the various sections. I think we made specific remarks on privacy, connectivity, and content agnosticism, and found that most of the other human rights aspects weren't actually relevant to the draft report, to the report as such. You can find the entire report in the link on this slide if you're interested in reading it. And that summarizes our contribution. Any questions?
Any questions, any comments?
One comment. So, Siobhan Sahib, I think what made it easy for me to contribute to this was that Amelia had set up a structure for the review. So I think having some kind of structure that we follow, or at least some recommendations on what an HRRT review should look like, is useful.
So that's something that might be a useful suggestion in a guidelines or something like that. Is that?
Maybe.
Maybe. Okay.
So I found also when I read Gurshaban's report on the suit drafts that he follows more or less the same structure that Siobhan and I also used. So yes, structure is definitely important in following a document that is already structured, as RFC 8280 actually is. I will also say that I overheard earlier in the week that at least one person found this review to be somewhat helpful. So if that's inspiring to anyone in the group, you can actually make a difference by just reading through documents and pointing out to people when they conflate various things or forget to mention positive developments that are worthy of mentioning. So if no other comments, thank you very much.
Thank you. Can you leave the clicker, please? You didn't get to use it, so I want it back. Okay, so the next one I've got is Gorshabad, and are you ready for me to push the unmuting button?
Hello.
Whoa. Hello. Let me get this right.
Is audio and video fine?
You're coming through very loudly.
Oops. Is it better?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay, please. I've got your top slide on, and tell me when to change.
Okay. I'll be saying next slide a lot. Apologies in advance. So Sandeep and I from CIS, we did a human rights review of the suit drafts. Could you go back to the previous slide? Sorry. Yeah. So we analyzed 3 drafts, and I'll briefly explain all the 3 drafts. Next slide, please.
Can you lower your volume just a little? It's looking painful.
Okay. Okay. So just to explain some terms which are used in the drafts, the firmware image is the update they want to deliver to the IoT device. The manifest contains metadata of the firmware image. This manifest will be used by the device to, it will be validated by the device, and then to find out whether the firmware image should be installed, etc. I'll explain more in a minute. The author is the entity creating the firmware image and the manifest, and the device operator is the person in charge or is administering the device. And this caveat, I'm simplifying it for the HR review. Next slide, please. So I'll just briefly go through what the 3 drafts describe. Next slide, please. So the main architecture is given in this draft. It's called the firmware update architecture for IoT devices. And besides the architecture, it lists out various requirements for the architecture. Next slide. So as I mentioned, the author is the entity creating the firmware and manifest. It sends it to the firmware server, which is responsible for distributing it to all the devices it's supposed to go to. And in the drafts, since they're looking at from an industry sort of perspective, they've dissected the operators into 2 categories for now. One is the network operator. You can imagine in a factory the person administering the network, and a separate entity which might be the same as the network operator, which is the device operator. And the network operator has this communicator which contacts the firmware server, and the device operator has a status tracker through which they can see where the update is in its progress cycle. Next slide, please. The information model is a very neat document. It lists out usability requirements and security requirements, all the use cases and the security threats. And it basically describes how these will translate into information fields in the manifest. Next slide, please. This describes the serialization format. We didn't have to look at it in detail for our review. Next slide, please. So our human rights review is from analyzing the human rights considerations given in RFC 8280. Next slide, please. As you know, it has 19 categories of considerations, and these are all listed here. But next slide, please. We didn't have to address a lot of, the slide shouldn't say out of scope, it should say not relevant. So I will quickly skip through this slide, but I have basically a wall of text which lists out why these aren't applicable and where they're addressed. And we found no concerns related to these categories. The integrity and authenticity of the manifest, etc., they've maintained through the author basically signs the manifest, and that's how it's validated at the device operators end. Next slide, please. So I'll just quickly get into the actual recommendations we made. So basically in 7 categories from the 19 and RFC 8280. Next slide, please. Next slide. So the first one is about the encryption of firmware. This falls into confidentiality, privacy, and security. So in fact, the information model draft in section 3.1.13, I think, it, one second, I'll quickly pull it up. It makes, it lists out a security requirement, which is firmware encryption. And it says that encryption helps to prevent third parties, including attackers, from reading the content of the firmware image. This can protect confidential information disclosures and discovery of vulnerabilities through reverse engineering. And since the vendor and class ID, which is basically device information, is compiled into the firmware image, not encrypting the firmware may lead to third parties gathering device information. And in fact, what we found was that the drafts were a little ambiguous about the requirement level of the encryption of the firmware image. So the architecture draft makes it optional, while the information model begins with that the information model must enable encrypted payloads. Next slide, please. Yeah, so the concerns are basically that it creates, it infringes on the privacy of the operator because device information is sensitive. And because this information is available to third parties freely, it means that the device is more susceptible to attacks because attackers can now mount targeted attacks, since not only do they know the device information, they also know the version of the firmware and manifest which was delivered. Next slide, please. So what we recommended was that the architecture recommend the encryption of the firmware rather than making it just optional. And we didn't recommend a mandation of the firmware image because the architecture is applicable to very resource constrained devices which may not have a decryption facility at all. Next slide, please.
Okay, I'd like to mention that we only have about less than 10 minutes left to the session.
Okay, I'll have it. So the next suggestion was on the encryption of manifest. The manifest actually contains the device information again. And what was surprising was that the drafts at least have a mention of encryption of firmware image, but they made no facility for encryption of manifest, considering that it contains the same information. So it should be equally confidential. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. So same concerns here, and we recommended that the draft identify a way to encrypt manifest as well. Next slide, please. I think we can skip this one because the drafts already support internationalization, but maybe it could be made more explicit in the drafts. This one also we can skip. Next slide. And in the reliability concerns, this is a question from RFC 8280. Do you have a documented way to announce degradation? Next slide, please. The answer is no for the suit drafts. Next slide, please. So what we found in the draft was that the status tracker, which I described, which is in control of the device operator, its mechanism wasn't exactly clear. So if the update failed, will it be apparent to the device operator? We're not sure. The status tracker could serve this function, but it's not abundantly clear in the drafts. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. So again, from the reliability section, we have that the question, do you have measures in place for recovery or partial healing from failure? And currently, the recovery mechanism is optional in the drafts. And as I said, the in resource-constrained devices, failure or success of the update may not always be apparent to the network or device operator. So we recommended that the drafts have a should clause for a recovery mechanism. Next slide, please. So continuing from that, the failure or success of the update should be apparent to the user. So in this section, we recommended that they elaborate on the mechanism of the status tracker. Next slide, please. So this is a suggestion that we actually retracted after some discussion on the suit mailing list. There was a fundamental difference in how we were approaching the drafts. I think the working group is looking mainly at very resource-constrained embedded devices in which a lot of features we assume for devices that are associated with humans may not be applicable. So let's consider this was an example given by a member of the suit working group, that if we have a water metering company and they have distributed devices to customers, they should have the ability to sort of push updates without authorization from the device operator. So this is a suggestion, they've separated the communication and authorization policy. So this is one suggestion that we've actually retracted from the review. Next slide, please. Yes, so we sent this on the mailing group on July 12th, I think, and there's been a lot of discussion. In fact, it was mentioned in the session at IETF, session of the suit working group at IETF102 as well. So this is just a summary of our recommendations, and 3 of them have actually been discussed. I think there'll be some progress on the others as well as we continue the discussion on the list. Yep, that's it.
Okay, thank you.
And just thank you to Amelia, Mallory, Niels, and Sunil for their inputs.
I was going to say no comments, but yes, one.
Dave Taylor, Suit Working Group Chair. 3 quick comments to the research group. Number 1, thank you, Gershrabad. This was great. Please keep it up. Number 2, you may have a discussion, and maybe you already did, about exactly when is the most appropriate time to do a review in the sequence of the lifetime of a document. From the working group's perspective, this one was really early, meaning this is long before we got consensus on things. From the working group chair's perspective, I think this time was great. It meant more work for Gershrabad because he found things that we probably would have found eventually. But from the receiving side, this was great for us, right? More work for him, great for us. So think about that. If that works for you, please keep that up, right? You could do it later and it would still be valuable. Doing it as early as possible means that it's more work for the reviewer, but hey, the working group loves feedback early. Thank you. And then the last comment, Gershrabad knows this because we had this discussion on the suit list, but for other reviewers, pointing out the issues was awesome. Making the recommendations as to what to do about those is a little bit more risky, because if you don't understand all the use cases, then your recommendation might not be right. And so that was one of the cases we discussed that said, some of the use cases are ones where there were devices that had no association with a human. And if you make things be mandatory for them, and so that was the kind of the discussion that we had. And so when reviewers make recommendations, think about whether the recommendation should be a must or a recommendation, or whether it should be conditional. Maybe it should be mandatory for things that are associated with humans, that type of thing. And so that would be feedback for future reviewers to keep in mind. So, but otherwise, thank you. This was great.
Fantastic. That was a heartening set of comments. So thank you. I'm going to immediately move on to quick, and hopefully we'll get through it and I give you at least time to say the few things. But here's the clicker, and sorry, and thank you, Gershrabad.
Okay.
Thanks. Sorry there wasn't more time for discussion.
Thank you. I'll try to be quick. So this is a review that we are doing using the human rights guidelines, and our focus is going to be Quick. You can read more about Quick. It's a new multiplex and secure transport on top of UDP. And it's very interesting. It has some key features that go beyond what you could have with TCP, TLS, HTTP2, and specifically some key new features are the dramatically reduce connection establishment time, improved congestion control, and also connection migration. You will see in the next slides why they're so important to us. So our research focus is mainly on 3 drafts. First of all, the core draft transport, now in the 13 version, then TLS and invariant. The outcomes for us are the following. We should improve the relevance and quality of the drafts that we are reviewing, of course. We also want to have the experience of new methodologies in which the group can use the human rights guidelines. I just joined the group recently, but I've been told that in the past we received the feedback that suggested to come with early engagement with drafts, authors, and editors, as Gurshabat did as well. So that's what we did. We were also recommended to have a sort of dialogue with authors and editors, and that's why we thought about using the methodology, the research methodology of interviews. So we are conducting interviews with the draft authors, editors, and key contributors of the working group. We started this week here in Montreal. We had so far 6 interviews. We're going to have a 7th, and there is another couple of possible folks that we could get in touch with. And so far, the feedback that we received was that they appreciated both our timing, because as you may have heard from the quick working group meeting a couple of mornings ago, they are about to ship it. So it's a good time for them to be focused. And they also appreciated our dialogue. And I'll tell you more about that later. So, of course, then we want to mainstream the human rights review in the IETF. What we hope to do with this is for sure an internet draft, not the kind of internet draft that you would like to turn into an RFC, but more of an internet draft that you have online and you have a permalink and you can refer to it. Then possibly an academic paper and other write-ups. So we, since we had these interviews this week and already have quite some good findings, we thought we could give an update of what we are finding during this meeting. So we are following, so basically what we did was reading these drafts, taking notes of everything that was notable to us as meaningful from a human rights perspective. And then we organize our thoughts in a second step, following the categories of our guidelines for human rights review. So you will see that the early findings are also organized following the guidelines. So we start with connectivity. Quick is very interesting because it improves connectivity on low latency and high loss connections, which makes a lot of it gives a lot of relevance when it comes especially to accessibility to countries with more difficult connection, especially non-Western countries, and we care a lot about that. Then, of course, it strengthens end-to-end encryption. And what is very interesting is that it is an attempt to address ossification. You can read more about that there, different ways in which that happens. The transport headers are encrypted, and the encryption prevents the ossification of the protocol by middle boxes. In addition to this, the group has also decided to add grazing. So the quick packet format is designed to allow future changes to the protocol. Privacy, on the positive side, Quick creates higher opacity for the observer because it establishes connection with multiple streams, and it decreases linkability through the use of connection ID when it comes to connection migration. There are a couple of interesting proposals that we also discussed with our interviewees. Padding, which could help to evade traffic analysis for protected packets, and the additional latency spin bit to the quick short header. And I'll tell you a bit more about the spin bit because this is very interesting, and it was also part of the conversation of the new proposed research group on privacy. So this spin bit is basically a bit in the header that flips once a round trip, so that observes the observer can estimate RTT. What does it mean? So this is explicitly designed for passive measurability of the protocol. It's very interesting for measurement researchers, but also for corporations as well. So against the spin bit is the argument, one of the argument is that it reveals information on the locality of the endpoints, and this could be a privacy concern. On the other side, on the defense side of who is proposing the spin bit, they say that they did experimentation, and yes, there are some information about the endpoints that comes up about their locality, but they're extremely a rough estimate. So they think they will not constitute a real concern.
I have to say that we are already now
Yes.
into the break time.
I'll be super quick.
Going to be interfering with the next session.
So you can check on the slides. You will see more considerations about security and internationalization, censorship resistance, and outcome transparency. This is very interesting because there is a whole conversation about the power shift that happens from the network operators to the endpoints. And we also think that we could hinder the analysis on non-discrimination of users. And if you have questions, you can tell us on the list personally, directly, and we'll keep giving updates to the group.
Yeah, thanks. And I think next time we can put this one sort of at the beginning, and because this one's going to be going on for a while, but thanks for that. I never got a chance. You'll send mail to the list. Thank you. And thank you all. And sorry I wasn't a little bit. Yes, Niels. What did I forget?
So we have now seen a lot of reviews that have been going on. So if people feel so, we had the input from Dave Teller, who said that it was useful, but also people that think it's not useful or the reviews don't make sense or could or should be done differently. Please let us know so we can try and keep on playing with this.
I think next time we'll put a major emphasis on looking at guidelines and seeing how they're working, doing so. So I'll try and make that, as opposed to a thing that we do at the end, something that we actually put a little bit more focus on this time. But thank you all, and really good stuff. Thanks. Either that or I'll ask for more time. I hope sitting here watching it and waiting for your chance was at least interesting.